So, in case you didn't know, there were two streams. We are live on YouTube. How's it going, YouTube? I'll try to check the comments here in a little bit. We're also live on Instagram. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them. I'm just going to start off with some background on this issue. So I've been trying to track this issue for quite some time, not only the Supreme Court rulings, but I've been working with some of the legal professionals that have been helping to write language to hopefully correct this issue. And unfortunately, this is just another instance in which it has been slapped down. So in the past, one of the legal professionals that I've talked to, just to give a little bit of extra background here, has helped to change the language from the cannabis container language used to say that it must be in a sealed, odor-proof, child-resistant cannabis container. The legal professional I spoke to, I can't remember which bill this was accomplished via, but they changed the language to sealed or resealable because some law enforcement officers were basically saying that if your seal was broken, then it's not sealed cannabis, therefore you can get this Class A misdemeanor. These cops just love giving out Class A misdemeanors, which is, by the way, is the punishment you get if you violate the vehicle code, the Illinois vehicle code with regard to cannabis transportation. So again, that requires that you transport in a sealed, childproof, odor-proof container. And the big issue is that odor-proof is, first of all, the products are not sold in odor-proof containers. Second of all, there's no such thing as odor-proof containers. Now, everybody likes to, whenever I say that, I get a lot of responses like, Cole, but I just bought one, or Cole, I was just looking for one. Yes, absolutely. If you do a search for odor-proof containers online, you're going to get plenty of results. What I'm telling you is that I've talked to officers that work with canines, and they've never encountered a container they can't get their canine to trigger on, right? Somebody just asked on the chat, the Instagram chat, are Class A misdemeanors even bad anymore? It's a good question. From what I understand, you can get, so let's say you beat your wife, right? Domestic violence. You get a Class A misdemeanor. Let's say you have a joint in your front pocket and it's not in an odor-proof container. You get a Class A misdemeanor. And you can see how these crimes are equivalent, right? That's me joking. Bad joke. But I'm saying it to illustrate the madness that is having this be a Class A misdemeanor, and realize that, as I covered on my mini documentary, which you can watch now at colememo.com/minidoc, that was a crime that was created in 2020, right? So between 2016 and 2020, hypothetically, you could have had a joint in your ear or in your front pocket in a vehicle, and it would have been a ticketable offense. You just had to pay a ticket, get out of here, right? Nowadays, according to legal professionals that I've spoken to, it's treated much differently. And I mean, you can even reference the Illinois Cannabis Regulation Oversight Officer's FAQ, which makes it clear. For those of you that are on Instagram, I'm sorry you can't see this. For those of you that are watching via YouTube, I'm sharing my screen. This snippet, which I'll zoom in for, is from the Illinois Cannabis Regulation Oversight Office's FAQ. And it explains clearly that if you do not have cannabis in a sealed, odor-proof, child-resistant container, it is a Class A misdemeanor. So it's a Class A misdemeanor to transport cannabis in any other type of container. They should add the words resealable. Maybe I'll reach out to them about that. I don't know. I don't know how much they like hearing from me. I really am trying to just be helpful to them. But They don't respond quickly. But anyways, that's another that's a whole other thing. That's not necessarily unique to their little state thing. That's some people are just slow to respond to emails. Anyways, back to the background on this issue. As I was discussing in the past, we've been able to add the words resealable to this language, but what we've not been able to do is remove the words odor-proof. So most recently in this last legislative session, somebody asked in the chat, what about a mason jar? Technically, I don't think that fits the definition. It's not a child-proof container. Begs the question why alcohol doesn't have to be in child-proof containers, but, don't mean to go on too much of a tangent. I will say that I tend to carry mine in a mason jar. And somebody asked, does that mean it has to be labeled with dispo information? No, it does not. Although law enforcement may try to tell you that. I got into a debate. If you go way back to the Chillinois podcast, I got into a debate with a law enforcement officer on exactly that on the podcast. And they ended up conceding to me that yes, in fact, actually nothing in the language even says you have to buy cannabis from a dispensary. It just says that if you're possessing cannabis, you must be within your possession limit. And if you're possessing cannabis in a vehicle, you must comply with the vehicle code. Right? So, anyways, like I was saying, the odor-proof language had been proposed to be removed. We had talked to the person that crafted that language on my podcast. Well, I've talked to them several times. They've come on and they'll be on again next week to talk about this. They are a defense attorney that has experience in defending against this exact language all the time. And so they tried, out of the goodness of their heart, to remove this language from the law. They're tired of representing innocent people in the court of law for something that's frankly a waste of time and effort. And I'll get back to the Instagram comments here in just a little bit. I see people are flooding in. I just want to round out this point. During the last legislative session, law enforcement objected to this language. Funny how that happens, right? And that went relatively unreported in the media. But if you want to check out that moment, I got it captured and it's available on my website. If you check out the latest article that I dropped, there's a little line that says, from what I understand, that proposal was ultimately scrapped due to objections from law enforcement. If you click on that hyperlink, you can see that video. And I will display what I'm referring to on my screen right now because I'm streaming from two platforms, sort of forgetting that I can share my screen. So this is what I'm referencing. If you want to check it out in the article that I dropped today, December 5th, if you click on this hyperlink, you can go over and watch this video, which is the Illinois Sheriff's Association opposing the removal of the odor-proof language, which ultimately resulted in that language being reinserted into the bill. So that brings us to today. We were hoping, obviously, for what I would call a favorable ruling. In other words, this being overturned. But frankly, lawyers made it clear that that's not, in this case where the language is very clear, and it is, the Supreme Court does not tend to question what the legislature meant or intended or whether or not it even makes sense. If the language is clear, they're going to go with it, and it is. And in fact, I was going to pull it up. Unfortunately, I can't right now, but it is on my YouTube channel, and it will be updated on colememo.com/history. I'm displaying my screen right now. This link, which I accidentally am linking to a broken link, I'll update that after I get off this stream. And you can also actually find this footage that I'm referencing on the Wayback Machine. If you look up Illinois Cannabis, it's a May 31st, 2019 hearing. And somebody specifically asks about the idea of cannabis, canines, and whether or not law enforcement will be able to continue to search vehicles. And the sponsor of the legislation, Representative Kelly Cassidy, made it very clear that nothing would change and that police officers would still be able to use cannabis odor as a means of probable cause to search a vehicle. And they even asked about court rulings and whether or not that would overturn it. And she said something to the effect of, do I need to read it again? In other words, it will continue to allow probable cause for law enforcement. She made it very clear that that was their intent in creating that law. I want to be very clear that they created that language in 2019. So today, that was solidified. The Supreme Court made it clear that it is what it is. And they actually referenced the Senate bill or the Senate debate that I was just referencing. They said, look, I think it's footnote number 7. I've got it included in this article here. So there was some dissenting opinion, and maybe we'll talk about that in a second. But it's worth noting that footnote number 7, and I'm displaying it on my screen for YouTubers right now. They say, we are mindful of pending legislation where the Senate has proposed an amendment to the vehicle code, which would provide the odor of burnt or raw cannabis in a motor vehicle by itself shall not constitute probable cause for the search of a motor vehicle or person. So again, it's nice to see them acknowledge that, and I remember that. But I also remember that proposal was ultimately scrapped due to objections from law enforcement. So really what we're going to need to see in order to actually get this issue addressed is some energy from not only the cannabis community, of course, not doubting that you'll have energy for this. We're going to need to see some energy from the legislature. And unfortunately, I don't know that we will. You know, a lot of cannabis activists seem optimistic right now that we'll see movement on cannabis policy in the upcoming session. I think our legislature is more concerned with Trump proofing the state of Illinois. And what does that mean, right? Because we have pretty awesome choice legislation and everything else. So I believe what that means is more of a focus on energy, trying to make Illinois a leader on different green policies, right? Some of these things that we've been pushing. I don't foresee us doing anything with cannabis, but maybe I've become a little bit cynical because things have just been wild lately with cannabis reform. So let's talk about the dissenting opinions because there were, and in case you didn't know what that means, not everybody, not all of the justices were on the same page. In fact, some of them said, I believe this was Justice O'Brien, it makes no sense to treat raw cannabis as more probative when the odor of burnt cannabis may suggest recent use, whereas the odor of raw cannabis does not suggest consumption. It's just pretty funny to see some of these justices understood the issue. Another one said, this might still be O'Brien. Common sense would indicate that a sober person can come into contact with an alcoholic beverage through drinking it or having some spill on his clothing, and that odor would remain with him for a period of time. The same is true of raw cannabis. A person coming in contact with raw cannabis, aka growers or people that work in the cannabis industry or just hang around people that enjoy cannabis, through touch or simple proximity, or possibly by opening or resealing the odor-proof container, would also carry that odor with them for a period of time, even if the person did not possess the raw cannabis on their person or in their vehicle in violation of the odor-proof requirement. They argued that the odor of raw cannabis alone should not constitute probable cause for a warrantless vehicle search, and they highlighted the inconsistency with the court's earlier ruling. I just thought that was really interesting. The dissent also compared raw cannabis to alcohol, like I mentioned earlier in that quote, noting that odor does not reliably indicate criminal activity. And this is the part that I found interesting, warned that this ruling risks perpetuating the stigmatization of cannabis users despite legalization. They didn't put it in air quotes. I did, because look, if you could still get arrested for having too much cannabis or for having cannabis where you can smell, that it's fucking ridiculous. We got a question in the YouTube chat, and I'll go over to the Instagram chat if you guys have questions. Somebody asked, is this transportation law unique to Illinois or is it similar to other states? That's a good question. I'm not sure of states that have odor proof language specifically, but I will say that other states have. I believe I just talked to a regulator from Massachusetts today that said that their Supreme Court made it clear that odor can no longer be used as a reason to search a vehicle. I believe Michigan has ruled that way. I believe Colorado has ruled that way. I believe California has ruled that way. But do Google and double check me. Um, Somebody said just get pulled over with both. Like, that's a terrible idea. Do you mean get pulled over with raw and burnt cannabis? Because I've been seeing people make that joke as well. And look, I'm not a legal professional, so I can't give anybody legal advice, but I've seen, and it's a funny joke. I want to be clear. Haha, it's a funny joke. Some people have been saying, "Oh, well, if our car can't smell like raw cannabis, but it can smell like burnt cannabis, should I just, you know, smoke a little weed in the car?" No, I don't think that's a good idea, especially if you have weed in the car, because here's the thing. Here's the deal. A cop can claim they smell things all day long, right? I can claim right now that I smelled something if I wanted to. I do. I smell this weed. Um, but the point is if you actually have weed on you and they claimed that they smelled weed, that right there is a class A misdemeanor because they claimed they smelled it and then you pulled it out. And if it's not that, that means it's not in an odor proof container. So boom, class A misdemeanor. They said to just get pulled over with a med card and a firearm card. Oh, I think I must have not seen your first question, Marcel. Too cool. You might be talking about the issue of firearms and cannabis, and that is a whole different topic right there. I can get into that if you remind me, but I want to stay on this topic for a moment. Burnt cannabis seems to be more likely culprit of impaired driving than just raw cannabis. So backwards is one of the comments that just came in via Instagram. If you're on YouTube, drop your comments. If you're on Instagram, drop your comments. I'm happy to respond, answer any questions anybody has. Also, we'll be talking with legal professionals next week on the podcast. So stay tuned for that. Lots of different comments here. JB got to go. Shout out to him for weed, but dude's a joke. I uh I don't fault him specifically for what's happened with cannabis because he didn't write the law. But he does say some pretty crazy things about cannabis. Like we should limit the licenses so that the prices don't get too low. It's like, get the fuck out of here. When do consumers ever have you ever pulled into a gas station and you're like, "Oh, the prices are too low. I don't know if they're going to be able to make it." No, when you see the prices are low, you're like, "I'm buying fucking gas from there." And if you drive by a dispensary and you see the prices are too low or are low, you're like, "I might buy some gas from there." That's another phrase for cannabis for the youngsters. Um, Stuff any contraband inside your parking brake. They cannot get into it without taking apart your car with tools. You're welcome. That is not advice from me. That is advice from one of my favorite cannabis reviewers, Cannabis Critique. Firearms legit. Firearms are legit in any legal state already ruled in Supreme Court is unconstitutional. There must be some firearm conversation going on in the chat because I don't know what's going on here. Had a cop try and trick me into saying I was leaving a cannabis venue. Just play dumb. Wish the officer a good day. I want to respond to that in a moment. People making the rules don't know the game. Yeah, well said. Well said. Yeah, legislators don't know what they're legislating. They just pass laws that have been, they push bills that have been written by lobbyists, and that ultimately gets signed into law. Sucks, but that's what it is. Had a cop try to trick me into saying I was leaving a cannabis venue. Yeah, so if I could give you advice on this, again, not a legal professional, so I'm not in any way, shape, or form able to give you legitimate legal advice, but I think the Pot Brothers at Law script is pretty reliable. Again, and I don't mean to say that that'll get you out of any trouble, but based on what I understand about it, let me just put it this way. You're not going to win a debate on the side of the road, or as some people like to say, you're not going to beat the ride. So let your lawyer deal with that and don't make their job harder than it needs to be. And the best way to do that, I think, is by employing the script, which is based in Supreme Court precedent. Why are you pulling me over? I'm not discussing my day. Am I being detained or am I free to go? And if you are being detained, invoke your fifth and shut the fuck up. You shut the fuck up. Don't tell the cop to shut the fuck up. You should shut the fuck up. And just, you're not going to beat the ride. If they're going to take you in, they're going to take you in. But at least you didn't make your lawyer's job harder if you didn't do anything wrong. And even if you did something wrong, you'd be surprised if you shut your fucking mouth. Lawyers can work some magic, right? So that's why you need a lawyer. So, kind of got off on a little bit of a tangent there. Any other comments before I go? Once again, I wrote about this in length at colememo.com. Lots of interesting things happened today. There was also a federal case challenging the prohibition of cannabis. I believe like the plaintiffs for that were like Verano and a few other cannabis companies. I don't know what the result of that is or was. I don't even know if it was heard today. It was scheduled to be heard today. Who knows? Maybe the appellate court is still alive because I joined it early this morning. I was like, oh, maybe I'll do some easy listening. And like an hour later, they're still on the first case. I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to listen to this all day. So never say shit. You know nothing. Well said, Cannabis Critique. Always have a dash cam as well. Fucking A right on that one. I need to get a dash cam. Thanks for all the coverage on these topics and keeping us informed. We appreciate your efforts. Thank you, Satisfied Mind. I appreciate you. I appreciate your continued support. Yeah, really appreciate people like you that are supportive and um, participate. It's been a while since we've done a community touch base. We need to do that. I was thinking about that the other day. Probably be pretty fresh if we did that. Maybe we could do one after the holiday season. The holiday season. But yeah. Well, cool. It was fun to go live. It's not often that I go live, but I felt this was appropriate. This is an appropriate thing to go live about. We're not necessarily celebrating today. To recap, we are thinking forward. We need to demand our legislators bring this issue back up. I can't remember who it was, but somebody said, I don't remember if it was part of Senate Executive Committee hearings or what, but when this issue was ultimately tossed last legislative session, like I was talking about, people were like, well, the Supreme Court is going to rule on this, and if they don't, we'll come back and clean it up. They need to come back and clean it up. The ball is officially in the legislature's court. They need to come back, clean it up. Again, I'm not super optimistic that we'll see that, and especially with how willing they were to just toss the language. See, this is the thing, and this is maybe what I'll leave you with. I understand that the industry has a lot of proposals, and I totally understand that there's a lot of things. So I understand there's a lot of things wrong with the industry, and I understand that the industry has a lot of proposals. Here's my suggestion to the industry. If you're having trouble getting your proposals across the goal line, maybe make it so that people like myself and people that are tuning into this live stream have something at stake, have a reason to call their legislators. Look, we all want more weed, so I could see how you could argue, oh, the increased canopy size or whatever else, this will make things better for consumers. Yeah, maybe, but we also need some more direct results. I think starting with this issue, maybe throwing in home grow, you could get a lot of energy from the cannabis community to support any proposal that you may have. It's like, hey, if you support this proposal, which gives us this, you could also get home grow, and we could remove that odor-proof language, and blah, blah, blah. I think what the cannabis industry and community is missing right now is that grassroots activism that got all of these things across the line. I really believe that. Hope I'm wrong. Anyways, I got to get going. Bad news, but again, onward, upward. Don't let this harsh your mellow, ruin your high. Be careful out there. You know, again, not legal advice, but if I were to give you any advice, it would be to speaking of firearms, transport cannabis like you would a firearm. And if you don't know how to transport a firearm, like you really shouldn't just have it like laying in your passenger seat. Like you should have it like out of arm's reach, maybe stored in something. I don't know. That's just generally what people say. Another way people say it is like just put it in your trunk, put it to where it's literally impossible for you to have been messing with it. I know some people have SUVs and trucks, so maybe the trunk isn't an option, in which case maybe get a lockbox or something. Just make it clear that, you know, you've not been messing with it. And frankly, it's a good time to remind it. This is a great note to close on. It's a good time to remind all of us that we should all only, this is an old stoner saying, break one law at a time. And as I said earlier in this stream, this is one law that's impossible to comply with. So if you're going to be driving with cannabis, you're going to be breaking the law. Break one law at a time. Don't have anything else on you that you don't want to be caught with. Whoa. Did you guys see that shit? What the fuck? Holy fucking shit. You could smoke crack with this fucking lighter. God damn. I just about burnt my fucking face off. Wow. I'm glad that was on live. So I got this lighter from, I think, God, it had to have been one of the events at Molly's joint. It's by a cultivator in Illinois, Galaxy. Jesus Christ. It's kind of cool. It's got a bottle opener on it, but that was insanity. I don't know if that's just because I was holding it a certain way. No, I mean, it just fucking could burn a house down with this thing. Weird thing to say, but that's all that could come to mind. I feel like I almost just burnt my fucking house down, is really why I said that, because I did not expect the flame to be that big. All right, well, excuse me. Let's see if there's any other questions on YouTube. Dave says, thanks for doing what you do, homie. Wow, that was cool. I'm guessing you're referring to that fucking lighter. Because Jesus Christ, we almost lost the kid here with that fucking lighter. My God, turning that down. Okay, we'll leave for real this time. Take care, everybody. Have a good evening.